Western world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Hello, friends of RadicalResilience.health and HealthRecoveryMinistry.org. The intro we did today was underlying music by Barry McGuire. He published that song in 1968. The 60s were a time of turmoil, uncertainty, and a lot of fear across America. In the 60s, we suffered the Cuba crisis following a failed invasion of Cuba and the Bay of Pigs. The Russians moved in nuclear submarines and were moving actually land-based nuclear missiles into Cuba when confronted by the United States. In 1963, of course, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and that's a subject that even today we still talk about, and there are theories of who did it. But we kind of know that it was done and carried out by people that worked with and for our own government and with the mob and with other entities. So there was a problem there. Following the presidency with LBJ, of course, Vietnam escalated. We moved more troops in. And in 68, the year this song was released, Eve of Destruction, we saw the Tet Offensive, where America learned that, conquering Vietnam and stopping what they were reporting or at least pushing to the American people, the reason behind the war was to stop and the spread of communism, that it wasn't going to be a cakewalk in Vietnam. And indeed, it was a very smart, entrenched, well-equipped, and backed force that we were fighting. Following 68, the protests went on. And of course, in 1969, you had this famous get-together up in Woodstock with a music weekend, all aimed at protesting what the government was doing in the war in Vietnam. And then there was a retaliation at Kent State in 1970 with the National Guard being called into those protests and literally 4 students being killed as a result of them taking charge of the protest and orders coming down from the government to actually open fire on the students. Now, of course, today you're saying, well, what does that have to do with today? Well, today I'd say we're kind of in a similar condition or position. We have the opening here that I showed. We've got the war going on between Israel and Hamas. So we've got terrorists that have been attacking Israel for years, and now Israel has retaliated, and the world is divided upon whether that retaliation is not in a manner that is humanly or humane or violates any of the codes of war. But the word there that we have to kind of focus on is the fact that they are at war. This is a war. Israel is at war with Hamas, and Hamas and its tentacles, which are, of course, supported by Iran and other terrorist organizations, now has spread all the way to America, and we're having the protests in the streets, and once again, at our colleges, and once again, they are turning violent. So we really don't know what the future holds, because we also have the war going on in the Ukraine, and millions and millions, of our tax dollars are supporting that war on the Ukrainian side, along with equipment. And the equipment that we're supporting now has that we're supporting the Ukraine with, now has the capability to deliver large capacity warheads all the way into Mother Russia herself. This is going to be a major escalation. So once again, are we on the eve of destruction as Putin has sent out warnings that if NATO gets involved to a certain extent, not knowing exactly what that trigger line is, will he retaliate with nuclear warheads, tactical nuclear warheads against NATO and other countries, which may include us on our mainland? In the meantime, the war itself has already had an impact on the world and also on the United States economy. We got a lot of our fertilizer, of course, from Russia. And of course, that was held up due to the war. And so the crops aren't going to be what they are. And so the food supplies are starting to diminish. We got food from the Ukraine. Ukraine's in war. They're not going to be able to have crops and food that they can distribute to the world and those people who were their former food clients. So we're looking at the possibility of being not only a shortage of food, but there's also a shortage of energy, such as oil and natural gas in the region. And the Iranian-backed Houthi are, of course, now shutting down the Red Sea. And we could possibly look at the fact that the Straits of Hormuz, with fast attack boats, will also, those tankers coming out with oil that were aimed to go to our allies and to ourselves here in America as an energy source, could be held up or even stopped in the near future. So we are looking at a major disruption of what is going on in the world that we would call a normal economic base. And to make it all worse, we have non-governmental organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and others who have gotten heavily involved in the political affairs of nations and influence what is going on, all of which has not made life better, but it has made it worse. And even this next week, we are having a protest in Switzerland over the World Health Organization's stance and what it thinks its powers should be, to include using UN forces to enforce mandates by the World Health Organization as it sees fit against nations in case there's another pandemic. So this decade already looks like it is going to start off much like the decade that Barry McGuire was singing about, with the eve of destruction. In the 2020 elections, we know that there was interference. To what extent, there's an argument about that, but we know it wasn't a legitimate voting practice, and the voting system was compromised. And so if you can't vote for who you want and put into office who you want, then we have a problem there. We have an impact on the food supply. We have an impact on our freedom of speech. We have 5G out there now and various systems that even through your phone can listen to what you're saying and what you're doing and monitor you. We have the use of drones for surveillance. But we have the use of drones in the Ukraine with weapons on them in case they need to attack the troops. What happens if in the future, much like with Kent State, they don't like what's going on with these protests and they arm the drones to go in and deal with it? That is a real possibility. In 2024, we have another election coming up. We hope that that election is going to be fair, but there is no guarantee of that given the past. So we are once again looking at the possibility of nuclear war in the future, shortages of food, interference of governmental processes, and restriction of rights for the American people and indeed for all the world. So I think the eve of destruction was an appropriate opening for this, and we are going to have to see how it goes. So let's move on to see what we can do to kind of prepare ourselves for some of these inevitable problems that I'm talking about that could manifest themselves in the future.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a going dry. Is up and the stock market's down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, the woman and the kids and the dogs and me. I got a shotgun, a rifle, and a four-wheel drive, and a country boy can survive. Country folks can survive.
Yes, a country boy can survive, and that is the key to what we're trying to do here. We need to learn how to survive any kind of crisis that might happen, whether it be something natural like a solar flare, or let's say you have a volcano, or heaven forbid that the Yellowstone cauldron blows up, because we have no idea what that would do. Or it's a man-made thing like an EMP attack or a cyber attack. Either way, what we're looking to do is to take actions as we prepare that will guarantee a high rate of survival for the people that are impacted by the crisis. And there are things you can do. We talked about, should I stay or should I go? There's a lot of things that impact upon that decision. Also, I did a video on the fact that in any kind of crisis that you go through, you're going to have mental toughness. In other words, you're going to have to say to yourself, okay, this is the environment I am living in for heaven knows how long, hopefully just a few hours or maybe a couple days, but it could last up to years, as we have seen in numerous documentaries about the effects of an EMP, or even, heaven forbid, a nuclear war that, is still being battered around right now. So we don't know, but you've got to be mentally tough to say, I am going to survive this. I am going to maintain a mental outlook that will help me survive through the future and into the future. So we've looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and of course, right there at the bottom, you've got those things we're going to talk about that'll help your survival, and that is shelter. You've got to have shelter. You've got to have food. You've got to have water, and possibly you may need some way to protect yourself. So we're going to look at all those, and the first thing we're going to look at, there's these things that have timelines associated with them. And one of those, of course, is water. Water you can only go without for about 3 days, maybe possibly 4, depending upon the environment you're in. So you're going to need water. So let's talk about water. Water is one of those things that if you're living in the city, is provided by the municipal district that's providing you water, and or some private organization that's a co-op that provides water to an area within the city. If we have a natural disaster or a crisis, the things that power the water plants will probably shut down. If electricity goes away, and this is the big, underbelly of America and many other nations right now, and particularly America, is the fact that almost everything runs on electricity. All your power plants, all your computers, your scheduling of the delivery of goods and the coordination of travel and transportation of goods across the nation is all regulated and controlled by computers. If you have something that impacts on that and the computer system goes down, that all stops. So what do you do when the water systems that provide you water no longer do that? Well, preparation-wise, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm just going to get, a few of these blue 5-gallon jugs, and I'll sit them in the corner and rotate them out every now and then, and I'll have water. But for how long? That's not going to last forever. So you've got to come up with a better plan, and the plan probably is, that's one of those things that impacts the should I stay or should I go. If it looks like the area you're in is a heavy municipal area, one of the big cities that is going to be targeted by a cyber attack, or maybe even, like I said, a nuclear war, then you've got to say to yourself, maybe it's smarter that I prepare some other place and get out of the city and get someplace where I can have at least those things that Maslow says I need to have, which of course is shelter, food, and water. So you need to think about that. So here's some things you can do in the meantime to buy you some time, because we discussed before that if you leave when everybody else is trying to get out, you're probably not going to get anywhere. The roads are going to get jammed, and that's the whole thing. So it might be better to just stay where you're at, have enough supplies there to spend the days of the initial crisis, and have the water and the food and the shelter right there where you're at. And then when things tend to clear, possibly then move on to your next destination, which is going to be your long-term shelter. So let's take a look at the things you can do about water. Well, you could get to know somebody that has a farm and has a water pump. You can get out and pump the water and put it into a 300-gallon tote, and people can come out there. That's not going to last very long either, because you're going to have transportation. And as you know, depending upon the crisis, some may work, some may not. And you're going to have fuel to facilitate the movement back and forth. So that is another one of those little areas you got to look at and say, well, how long can we do that? So the biggest issue probably is you need to get with the community, sit down and devise a plan and see what is available and what can work and what can't, and then go forward with it. So it's not going to be real easy. If you've looked at the fact that maybe the smartest thing to do is to leave the city, go to the country, go find a place or some friends that are next to a river or a big lake, then you can take care of that water problem. You get some way to filter it, some way to clean it from microbes, and you've got water you can drink for a period of time. So you've taken two of those hierarchical needs that Maslow talked about, shelter and water, and those are solved. So we then need to probably move into looking at food. And food, once again, has its own set of problems that go with it. Most of the country doesn't grow the food in the cities. Obviously, you're in the city, then food comes to the city. And stores only put things on the shelves that are going to last for about 72 hours. Well, 72 hours, the crisis may not even be completely developed, or it may last for months. So where do you go get your food? The stores have it trucked in. Once again, cyber attack, EMP, trucks aren't rolling. Run into problems with what's going on with, let's say, the countries that produce oil. Right now, we have the Houthis shutting down the sea lane going through the Red Sea. Well, that means they have to go all the way around Africa and back up, which takes a lot of time and impacts on the supply chain for not only oil, but for many other things. And some of it being possibly your food or fertilizer to grow food. So all that needs to be looked at. In the meantime, planning-wise, I would highly recommend that you stock food. Probably the best way to do that is dried. In other words, if you can dry meats and those types of things that'll last, dried foods will probably last the longest amount of time. Or you can freeze dry things. That seems to work really well too. And they get it in packets like, hikers use. They open up the packet and pour some water into it, rehydrate it, and all of a sudden they've got a meal. That's a good way to go. But in the meantime, getting a freezer and getting food and rotating it through, first in, first out, you keep dates on it and you rotate it through. So you've always got a stock of food there that will keep you fed over a period of time while you assess the situation and figure out, okay, what's the next step? What are we going to do next in this crisis as we move forward? So food can be grown. You should have a garden if you can. If you have a place where you can have chickens in your backyard, I'd raise chickens. You get eggs, so you have the chickens help, maintain things around your yard as far as elimination of bugs and fertilizing the lawn or doing whatever. The chickens are a good way to go. And once again, get to know your local farmer. Buy food that's nutrient dense, put it in a freezer, and rotate it through as you use it. Then when a crisis comes, you have it. Now, you may have to invest in a solar or multiple fuel generator, and that works pretty well. We were in Hurricane Isabel back in Virginia back in 2003, and we were down for 8 days. We had a generator. We ran it only an hour or so a day. It kept the freezer frozen at the minus 10 degree temperature, and all of our food was fine. We had 10 days with absolutely no impact on our food flow because we had food stores in our freezer that we ate off of for those 8 days and could run the freezers with a generator. That's one option. The other option, as I said, is buying foods that are freeze dried or or dried to the sense that you can reconstitute them and use them. So that's a way to go to. And you can always sprout in your house, in your window, get seeds and sprout them and eat those along with the other foods that you're having. So there's ways to look at and plan for food issues. But once again, over a long period of time, you need to look at that, and that can only be fixed really and addressed down at the local level, down at the local family level, working with other people, getting to know your farmer. You know, who's your farmer? I've got a t-shirt that says that. Go out and find out where you're going to get your food in the middle of a crisis or an emergency. Because as we saw, a couple of years ago during COVID, riots happened, stores were burned down. I see all the time when Boston literally had a couple roads get washed away, and the trucks couldn't get the food in. And so for 3 days or more, there was no food arriving. And literally the National Guard had to come in and feed people meals ready to eat, MREs that they feed the Army, until they could fix the roads and get the supply chain reestablished. So you've got to look at that. So those are 3 things we need to look at to, survive. And that's what this is all about. If you're not into survival, then there's no reason to take preparation. But to survive, you're going to have to prepare. And there are things you need to do, and you need to address those now. Once in place, then you can kind of take a deep breath and rest a little more easily and say, okay, if a crisis comes, I am ready, and we'll go from there. So thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or are wanting to look at some documents that can tell you how to do some of these things, go to, once again, radicalresilience.health or healthrecoveryministry.org. There are many documents there all about water, shelter, food, process and what you should store over a year's period of time, how much you need per individual based upon their age and weight and those types of things. All those documents are on that website, and they're there for your usage. So once again, thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again on another day.